Police officer detains an FBI agent in a cafe. City pays the price, sir. Stop resisting. The officer's voice cuts sharply through the cafe, controlled but firm enough to silence every conversation in the room. Chairs scrape as people turn toward the sound, and within seconds, phones are already raised, recording everything. A man who was sitting quietly just moments ago is now being pulled to his feet, his chair sliding back behind him. "Wait, what are you doing?" he says, trying to steady himself. His tone is not aggressive, and it is not panicked. It is confused, genuinely confused, as if the situation unfolding around him does not match reality. Just seconds earlier, he had been working. His laptop was open, documents spread neatly across the table, his attention fully absorbed in what he was doing. Nothing about his presence suggested urgency, disturbance, or threat. Now he is in handcuffs, standing in the middle of a crowded cafe, surrounded by strangers, watching everything unfold. "Sir, you were asked to cooperate," the officer says, maintaining control as he secures the cuffs. The man looks at him again, this time more focused, more direct. "You're making a mistake," he says. The words are not loud, but they carry weight. They are not a reaction. They are a warning. And no one in that cafe understands yet how serious that warning actually is, because the man being detained is not who they think he is. It had started less than 5 minutes earlier, and at that point, nothing about the call suggested anything unusual. A complaint had come in from inside the cafe. A customer had reported feeling uncomfortable because of a man sitting alone for too long, working quietly and spreading documents across his table. There were no claims of threats, no raised voices, no disruptive behavior, just a vague concern that something felt off. Calls like that rarely turn into anything serious. They are usually resolved with a quick conversation and reassurance, and most of the time, they are forgotten within minutes. The officer entered the cafe expecting exactly that. He stepped inside calmly, scanning the room with a practiced eye, looking for anything that stood out. At first, everything appeared normal. People were seated at their tables, conversations were low, and the environment felt relaxed. Then his attention settled on one individual. The man near the back was sitting alone, completely focused on his laptop. Papers were spread across the table in a way that suggested organization, but also intensity. He did not look up when the officer entered, and he did not react to anything happening around him. That stillness stood out. In a place where people shifted, talked, and moved, he remained completely absorbed, almost disconnected from the environment. The officer approached him directly. "Sir, I've had a complaint. I need you to step outside with me," he said. The man looked up, clearly interrupted but not defensive. "About what?" he asked, his tone calm and controlled. "I'll explain outside," the officer replied. That was the first moment where the situation could have remained simple, but it did not feel simple anymore. "I'm working," the man said. "Can we just talk here?" It was a reasonable response, but it was not compliance. "I need you to come with me," the officer repeated, his tone tightening slightly. There was a brief pause, and in that pause, the direction of the situation began to shift. "No," the man said. The refusal was quiet, but it was clear. It was not emotional, and it was not aggressive. It was deliberate. From the officer's perspective, that refusal changed everything. What had started as a routine inquiry was now becoming an issue of compliance. From the man's perspective, nothing had changed at all. "Sir, if you don't cooperate, you may be detained," the officer said. The cafe began to grow quieter as more people noticed the interaction. The man slowly closed his laptop, his movements careful and controlled. He looked up again, his expression steady. "You're making a mistake," he said. The officer did not engage with that statement. He moved forward with procedure. "Stand up," he said. The man complied, rising slowly, his hands visible, his posture controlled. There was no sudden movement, no sign of aggression, but there was also no agreement in his demeanor. Outside the cafe, the situation became more defined. The officer began asking questions, requesting identification and basic information. "I can't provide that right now," the man said. That was the moment the situation locked into place. From the officer's perspective, the interaction had escalated into non-compliance. There was no longer room for negotiation. "Turn around," the officer instructed. The man did not resist physically, but he did not assist either. His hands were guided behind his back, and the cuffs were applied. Inside the cafe, several people were already recording, capturing the moment as it unfolded. Then the man spoke again. "I'm a federal agent." The words were calm, but they carried immediate weight. The officer paused briefly, processing what had just been said. "You should have said that earlier," he replied. But that assumption was already flawed. From the man's perspective, it should not have been necessary. The officer requested identification again, this time with more attention. The man indicated where his credentials were, and after a careful check, the reality began to emerge. The identification was verified. The man was an agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The situation changed instantly. The cuffs were removed, and the tone shifted, but the moment itself could not be undone. Inside the cafe, the recordings had already begun to spread. Within hours, the footage appeared online, and by the next day, it had reached a much larger audience. The story was simple and immediate. A local police officer had detained a federal agent in public without fully understanding the situation. That simplicity is what made it powerful. The focus quickly moved beyond the individuals involved and toward the system around them. Internal reviews were initiated, and Bodycam footage was examined in detail. The goal was not only to determine what had happened, but how it had happened. Situations like this are rarely caused by a single mistake. They develop through a series of small decisions, each one leading naturally to the next. There were multiple points where the outcome could have been different. A clearer explanation at the beginning might have reduced tension. A different interpretation of the man's behavior might have prevented escalation. Each of those moments became part of the review process. The legal implications were significant, as detaining a federal agent raised questions about authority and procedure. Financial concerns followed, as incidents like this often result in claims and settlements that extend beyond the original event. The reputational impact was equally important. Public trust is not lost instantly, but situations like this can affect how institutions are perceived. The phrase "the city pays the price" became more than just a headline. It reflected a chain of consequences that extended beyond the cafe. Resources were required to investigate the incident, policies were reviewed, and additional training was considered. What made the situation notable was how ordinary it had seemed at the beginning. There had been no clear indication that the interaction would escalate. The environment had been calm, and the initial exchange had been simple. The escalation happened gradually, shaped by differing perspectives and assumptions. From the officer's perspective, each step followed procedure. From the agent's perspective, the situation never justified those steps. That gap between perspectives is where the conflict developed. In the end, the incident was not defined by a single moment, but by the sequence of decisions that led to it. Each action was reasonable within its own context, but together they created an outcome that carried wider implications. The cafe returned to normal, and the immediate tension faded, but the impact of the event continued. It became part of a broader discussion about communication, authority, and judgment. What began as a routine call became something far more significant, not because of what was intended, but because of how it unfolded. And once it reached that point, the consequences extended far beyond the moment itself.